May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, happy Easter once again to each and every one of you. It's so great to see you here. It's this great joyous morning. You come to a place like the Hills Church and you have this wonderful brass and timpani here, the choir singing in full force, all of you here dressed in your Easter finest. If you have kids, I'm sure you were wrangling this morning and maybe feeding them with a little too much chocolate to get them jazzed up. And I can see them moving around in the pews right now. We have all this joy that that comes with us as we come to this space. And then we turn to the text that we have for Mark, and what a letdown that text is. I don't know if you were paying attention, but in this Markan text, it's the only one of the four Gospels where the resurrected Christ does not appear. Not only does the resurrected Christ not appear in the Gospel of Mark, but it ends with the women leaving the tomb afraid. That's it. It's like, and the women left and they were afraid. Boom. End of Gospel. Unsurprisingly, in the early church, people were so disappointed with this ending that they went ahead and wrote another longer ending. They're like, this can't possibly end this way. So in your Bibles, there's a section, verses 9 through 17 in Mark, but that was added very late. None of the earliest manuscripts have verses 9 through 17. And even people in the early church noted that that wasn't the original ending. So we're left with this just profoundly disappointing resurrection appearance. But since this is a Markan year in the lectionary, and I'm a glutton for punishment, I'm like, let's go ahead and let's go with this text anyway. Now, there's a remarkable thing about this text. I don't know if you caught it, but in this text, none of the male disciples show up. The only disciples here in this text are the three women who go to the tomb. Think of how remarkable that is. In the ancient world, you had a world that was even more sexist and misogynist than our society is today. In the Greek world, they said that women were not fully developed men. And yet, all four gospel accounts are clear that the first people to the tomb were the women. And here in Mark, they're the only ones who are there. Now, the church over 2,000 years has a long history of sexism and misogyny. This is particularly true in the Catholic Church, but it's true in all Christian churches. And yet, anyone who's actually spent time in churches knows that time and again, the people who show up and get the work done tend to be the women. Time and again, any event you go to, any board you go to, anything that goes on, who is showing up to do the work? It's the women. And so often that's true in society more broadly. Our society has this sense where we expect women to be superhuman. Women are supposed to somehow take care of kids and do all the chores and cook food. Women are supposed to work and they're supposed to do it all with a smile, never be ruffled and never be too aggressive, but be just aggressive enough. In this text, Mark is standing up and saying that he sees all of the women out there. And he says, you are the ones who were the first disciples. Thank you. That's one message that comes out of this text in Mark. But there's another more important message. And that is that these women, when they show up at the tomb, they had lost everything. They come from Galilee in the north. They gave up their lives in order to follow this rabbi. They watched him heal people. They listened to his teachings. He was their future, their life. This is what they were looking forward to. And then here in Jerusalem, they had to watch him be betrayed by one of his closest friends, put on a sham trial, tortured to death. Now, at the foot of the cross, the men were nowhere, but the women were there. They had to witness it. And so you can imagine what they were feeling like on that first Easter morning. These women were people without hope. This past week, I was talking to a friend of mine, someone that I knew from years ago, who called me up. Someone I knew when I was in Houston. And he reached out to me because he said, I need some help. And I said, okay. And as I was listening to him, he talked about how he's finally, he thinks, getting over this horrific relationship he was in. A relationship where his partner was someone who lied, who was constantly deceptive, who was cheating on him, and yet he just couldn't let go because he loved this person so much. They were on again and off again for years, and finally he was able to let go, but he still carried deep wounds from this. He talked about his job stuff, which has gone up and down throughout the course of his life. Never really being able to find just the right thing for him. And then on top of it all, he got long COVID. And he was describing how over the past year, most days he just can't even get out of bed. And he said to me over the phone, there are days where I just want to die and not go on. And this guy's maybe 32, 33 years old. And he says, in the midst of it, I can't find God. God is silent. One of my really close friends, someone who I actually get to see later on today that I'm quite excited about. This is someone who was there for me in one of the darkest periods of my life. And this friend I had gone to college with, and when she was in college, she got involved in all these social justice causes, and she was the original social justice warrior. But as a result, some of her grades weren't exactly great, and her great dream was to go to medical school. So after school, she went back, took extra classes, studied, applied to medical school once, got rejected from every medical school, restudied again, took the MCATs again, applied again, got in, gets to medical school, and in her first year of medical school, she struck down with a chronic illness, an autoimmune condition that was so debilitating that in her second year, she had to withdraw. She had $100,000 in debt, had to go home, and she had no idea what she was going to do. Sometimes life is incredibly cruel. And unfortunately, for some people, that cruelness just seems to keep going again and again and again. And maybe you're someone who's experienced that at some point in your life, where there's been some point in your life where you've just been shattered. Maybe it was something that happened at work where all of a sudden you found yourself without a job and you had built your whole career as this, and all of a sudden the next day it's just gone. Maybe you found yourself realizing one day where you heard those words from your spouse, I want a divorce, and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to go forward. Maybe you're someone who's had issues with your kids. Sometimes your children who you try so hard to be good parents for, but sometimes your best efforts simply don't seem to be enough, and it breaks your heart. Or you've been married for a long time. Your spouse is the person who was the rock in your life, and then your spouse is no more. Some people struggle with loneliness and depression. And some people, of course, have to go through that worst of all things, losing a child. And when you do that, there are certain times where it just seems like there is no hope. There's nothing forward. There's nothing to do. God is silent. No words help. Nothing else helps. And this is where it's helpful to turn to this message here that we see in the Gospel of Mark, because the women felt exactly the same way. And unlike the men, what do? They go buy spices, and they go to the tomb to anoint the body. When all is lost, when sense of meaning is all gone, when there is no hope, they fall back on those things that they know to be true, and they get up and they do them. Certain times you have those moments in life where you can't see any way forward, but you just wake up, you tie your shoes, and you go and you do the right thing. You try to help other people even though you don't feel the presence of God. You just keep going. There's this line in our text where the women are going to the tomb and they're like, oh, well, who's going to roll away the tomb? Who's going to roll away the stone from the tomb? And commentators have commented on this. What an odd line to give. But I'm like, no, this line makes total sense. Because sometimes you're in that point of life where you can't even organize things one day after another. You can't even figure out your schedule for the day, let alone how the stone's going to be rolled away. And so they're walking, they're like, gosh, we forgot about the stone. I get it. You're in that horrible place. And then the women get to the tomb, and this angel, this young man, says to them that Jesus is raised, and the news is too good for them to hear. And so often when people are in those really dark places, even good news is news that just doesn't get through. Too much goodness is just too much goodness, and you just have to shut yourself off from it. And so I get why the women are there, and they're trembling, and they run away afraid because they're not ready for that message. But the young man says that don't worry, Jesus will meet you someday in the future on the road to Galilee. You may not be ready for that good news now, but that good news will be there someday. The resurrection account of the Gospel of Mark is an odd one. It's not for everyone, especially on an Easter morning. Some other accounts are more joyous, and in years ahead we'll get to hear those. But for today, the message is Mark. And the message is written particularly for those people who have no hope. And the answer is when you're in those places, sometimes you just have to get up, buy the spices, go and anoint the body, because that's the right thing to do. Now, holidays can be tough. Easter can be tough. I was literally getting my haircut the other day, and the guy was cutting my hair. It's like, Easter, I want to get a haircut for Easter, as many do. And he's cutting my hair, and he's just in a foul mood. And I'm like, well, what are you doing for Easter? And he's like, blah, 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 blah. And then as we get talking, he shares that in the past year, he lost both his parents. And his parents loved Easter. And as he was talking through, he's like, that's why I've been in such a bad mood this whole week. I'm just not ready for the holiday. And so if you're in that place right now, just not feeling it for Easter, you got up this morning and you're like, does it really have to be Easter? Do we have to go to church? The advice for you is this, that let yourself be immersed in the great music. Hear the joy. It might not be your joy today, but hear the joy. Because if you listen closely enough to that joy, what you'll hear is that over the last 2,000 years, Christians have experienced the resurrected Christ in some kind of way that has changed their lives. Today, but let that joy be there, because someday, no matter what dark place you're in, our faith says that you will meet the risen Christ on the way to Galilee. May that happen for you.